Bene, benvenuti, faccio un minuto in italiano, 1 minute in Italian, and then we switch to English, e poi passiamo all'inglese. Grazie di essere qui, oggi appunto facciamo questa presentazione nella Special Community Night e vi introdurrò i guest, non parlerò troppo e vi racconterò che cosa succede stasera. So, thank you for being here. We start this Special Community Night to talk about new way of collaborations, a new way to use textile with electronics. WeMake is a makerspace founded like almost 5 years ago. We usually do residencies and we do international collaborations, and that's why also it happens that we do this event in English. We think is very useful and important to keep in touch with international communities, because as makers we are really part of a bigger community rather than being local, and it's a nice let's say dynamic between what happens locally in a space like this, where people can make a membership, use the machines, talk with people and interact, and then there is another type of collaboration that happens online. Let's say that tonight I think we are going to tell a bit of some stories of what happens when the collaboration is international but is physical and online, and staying here and also traveling around the world through an online platform that allows to create a special relationship and to improve the way we do our projects, because I think this is the basics of open source, and this is the basics of making, I think, all the makers try to make this world a bit better than it is, and open source is one of the means to reach that goal. Tonight I'm here with also Sabina, that she is collaborating with me on the collaboration that we started with Wikifactory. Our special guests, international special guests, are here with us, and so today we are going to moderate this event, me and Sabina, and we will have two special guests. One is Cristina Rebel. She flew from Madrid today, actually, and she's going to stay these 3 days. And she's going to introduce us the Wikifactory platform. And then we have Ejtech, a duo of designer, maker, and textile artists that are with us for the second Maker in Residency. They came here 2 years ago, and now they are here again, actually to finish their project that started 3 years ago. They will tell us. And they will show us the demo, and they will tell us, and you will learn what is the connection between two projects, because there is a connection. So I don't take much time. During the presentation, please be free to ask questions and don't stop, and we want this to be a bit interactive also, because there's going to be a bit of demo, so feel free to interrupt. So I think that I can start giving a word to Cristina, who is going to introduce the platform and the mission and the vision of this amazing project started like 3 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for being here.
Oh no, thank you, Zoe, Sabina, Constantino, everyone, for coming today. I have to say, I hope we can reflect the quality of relationships that we find in this space over the Wikifactory, which is the challenge, right? If you want to build an online community, you want to make it based on real relationships. Move away from the individual, which I think is a bit of the issue with the services that we find on the web right now. It's too focused on the individual project that is listed in some library site, when ultimately projects happen through collaboration of peoples and communities. But before I get into that, it's true that the spark that brought about Wikifactory was around 3 to 5 years ago. We were based in London, and in our community space, in our co-working space, we were seeing quite a few open source design movements appearing. And we were a bunch of technologists really interested at the, let's say, how we can apply open source and social technologies in different social fields. And so when we were seeing that there were these open design movements emerging, in that time we were helping out WikiHouse. There was also this enabling the future. This is, I think, one of the most popular 3D printed projects for 3D printed prosthetic hands that you could make anywhere for a disabled child. It's brilliant, it sounds beautiful. And when we were seeing these movements emerging, as technologists ourselves, we're like, great, we want to see more of this. Can we see the spillover of open source software to design, where ultimately, the world is your product development team, where we can ultimately crowdsource ideas, improvements, potential problem solving. We loved it. So we started getting into WikiHouse at the time, and we met with a great deal of frustration, because ultimately the infrastructure just wasn't there. Yes, they could be listing, and this is exactly what they were doing at the time. We were listing the architectural models for this open source home on Google Drive. And we had the instructions on some PDF in another service. And we had the forum in another place. And there we were about to get quite a bit of press attention, and we knew that we could actually catalyze this into real community. But we didn't have the infrastructure to manage it. So this is where Wikifactory came in. Like, we need to build basically the GitHub. What does open source software have for collaboration on software? We have GitHub. And there is no GitHub for product design. So that was the inspiration. And it led us to the current, well, if you see, we have here the social design and production platform. I would say that this inspiration ultimately would spur the social design aspect of things, which at the heart of it, we have a global community of innovators, whether designers, makers, engineers, developers, all sharing projects. Projects are at the cornerstone, just like you would have on GitHub repositories. Projects are the repositories for digitally fabricated products. So let's take the Pick-on telescope, for example. So if the heart is these projects, I'm going to stand up so it's a little easier to go back and forth.
Closer to the chair.
Well, I don't want to block your beautiful faces. So at the heart of the worth of having a central repository is a place where you can ensure that if you are going to draw a community in, you have the files, which you find here, the documentation, so that once someone has downloaded and they can actually read the instructions on how it works, how they can get involved, and ultimately, which is I think the keystone, in fact, of how we build software, is the issue tracker. The issue tracker is where you basically can crowdsource ideas, ways to solve possible bugs, think about enhancements to the project. This is at the cornerstone of software development, and we want to apply those best practices of agile software development to the world of product development. Of course, it's not exactly the same. Software, in fact, is very different to products. For the obvious, but even if we don't deal with the obvious, the fact that software is virtual and a product is physical, even in terms of the repository infrastructure, there's something different when we're handling complex geometries than binary files. So we need to actually think anew this model of how we're going to deal with contributions, because it's not as easy as dealing with Git and code. So we build a system based on history of contributions, where for every contribution that you do to a project, you tag a title and a description of what that contribution is, so that we can deal with the problem of version control. So I mean, say we're working on a wind turbine and you want to do a change to that design, great, go ahead and do it and upload that contribution, where you'll be able to specify exactly what changes have been made, which files have been added,
In this case, I was looking whether the changes are anything significant. It's actually all down to the README. But here you'd be able to see which files were updated. I have to say, in a few weeks, we'll be able to see the actual file rendered. We're working so that you can actually see the annotated comment on the 3D file. So it's a very interactive way of seeing what contributions had been done and whether you want to adopt that in your further work or not. So these are the kind of thoughts that we've had around how to improve the methodology in the virtual context for product design. But there's a huge difference in the fact that we're dealing with a physical object that needs to be fabricated. So this is where it gets really exciting. And this is where I think our unique value proposition stands really strong. Because ultimately, anyone who knows or is involved in the space like you guys do will know that to create this Pick-on telescope here in WeMake is not just about downloading files at all. It's not even about following through these documentation instructions to make it. It's down to the design to production process. There's a whole great deal of steps using different software packages and different input and outputs that ultimately makes it impossible to replicate a project if it's not specifically talking about process, away from things, but replicating process. So this is where it gets really cool. Because if you look at the world of product development in large companies, what they are building with, what they're designing with, is just, there's this quote, the future is already here, is just unevenly distributed. And it's true. Product development companies have such a wonderful set of tools to take a 3D file, be able to simulate it, and be able to configure that design to the best settings for the machine so that that machine can ultimately print that reliably. Because anyone that's tried to 3D print it will know that there's a few issues here and there, and there's a process, there's a beauty in that process, and we think let's not remove that beauty because it is still really enjoyable. But the point is, let's allow for data to flow throughout that design to production process. And so what we see is to build on top of our file repository so that you can extend your files with a series of software transformations and ultimately being able to send to a fabricator directly from your repository. Even just that step, if you want to work with any fabricator at the moment, say you're shopping around, whether you're going to be using X or Y or Z service, you have to upload all your files and your specifications to this place. Turns out you don't want their quote, you don't accept their terms, it's not what you're looking for. Again, having to send your files, do the negotiation. We live in a virtual world. You should be able to provide a webhook directly to your repository where the development's already happening and not waste that time. If you speak to some of our friends, actually have had to hire a person dedicated to that process of choosing which fabricator is going to reliably make their designs so that they can iterate and improve their designs. That's unreliable. So, in effect, this is where we are building on top of Wikifactory. We've built an infrastructure, a core infrastructure, to host files, but be able to extend that with the software programs that will see you through that design to production process in an iterative way. So that whatever choices that you made in terms of how to slice that 3D design can influence the design process. Because it ultimately does. You've got a hole in your design, whether you choose 3 perimeters over 5, that's going to eat into your white space. You're not going to be able to screw that design. Oh, again, you have to print it. Things like this. When product development companies are able to run simulations and be able to simulate the production or the machine code of a design 1,000 times to arrive at the most efficient way of producing something, there's something really interesting in that. And it's just software. Our mission in Wikifactory is to basically bridge the product development capacity that these big corporates have and apply it to the open space and open design world. And that's our commitment. And why? Because we really do believe in the capacity that this next generation of product designers have in developing more sustainable products, more social products, products that can actually have an impact in our lives. And it's across the board. There's not a single project on Wikifactory that doesn't inspire me. So this is the introduction. I hope you found it interesting. And just a case in point in how we are extending the repository to do things that aren't available yet. I'm just going to show you an example of, well, I guess this is just STL files, but let me take the case of this really cute robot, Shibo. It's wonderful. Because Shibo, of course, everyone has a practice of sharing STLs, but ultimately we all design in CAD. It's as if we've gone down the lowest common denominator and offered our design on STLs. But STLs are such basic geometries. If we take anything more complex, or say more advanced, like step files, we're able to specify what materials that things should be made in. We could be exploding the designs. There's so much more value in more complex design files over STL. But ultimately, the big barrier to collaboration is, unless you've got Rhino, or unless you've got SolidWorks, you might not even be able to render it on your own computer. So we take away that issue. And in fact, we render design files of a huge variety straight on the web and reliably. So I'm going to show you. So this is a Rhino design. And this is the Shibo. And we're doing really neat things here. So you'd be able to, using this design, apply a mesh repair and be able to see on the web what parts of the design has an issue, maybe a non-manifold issue or a water tightness issue, which is actually the same problem, or be able to see the effects of slicing on this design on the web. The truth of the matter, there's a whole tool chain that happens, and we've focused on sharing designs, which is great, but we need to enable data to flow throughout the process, because then we're going to be making more empowering decisions as to how we design our things, and we can be more transparent and involving of others to be able to replicate it anywhere. And therefore, we can actually get closer to this idea of being able to share a design for a prosthetic hand and actually print it in the middle of nowhere in Tibet, which we actually tried, in the middle of nowhere Tibet, and actually make it for a kid who needs it. That's where we want to head, and we're committed to bring best practices in design and production and making it possible for this community. Thanks.
Any questions? Or I don't know. So I can show you, Sabine and me, in these 2 months we involved some of our community to start using the platform, because the nice thing is that if we join now, we can really also affect the way development is going. And I think this is amazing, because sometimes it's not so easy to also give a feedback to what things have been coded, to also say, look, it would be great to have that feature. And they are always listening to what people that collaborate and upload their projects have to say about what is the interaction with the community. So for example, we involved, there is a preview, because we involved this project, so some of you may know. There is Sopra Sotto. It's a self-organized kindergarten that has 5 years old of age here in Milan. Parents that are not able to find a place in a normal and state kindergarten or municipality kindergarten, and could not afford. Here we have parents, or in the future parents, and some of them cannot afford to have a private kindergarten. And usually from 0 to 3, you're not really allowed to have a place in the kindergarten if there is no space. So they organized a kindergarten by themselves, organizing among parents and finding a place that could host them during the day. We are going to release. They are going to release a kit to help other communities to build self-organized kindergarten in their location. How to deal with education, how to deal with finding a place, how to deal with bureaucracy, everything. And so, in the past months, we said, but how did you do with the furniture? They had some help from some carpenters that could help her do the furniture. But we said we could simplify this. And so we took some ideas from what they got in the official kindergarten that we have here in Milan, and with the help of some designer that were doing an internship here in we support them in developing laser cut furniture for self-organized kindergarten. And we released all the files on the platform. So it was a way for us to see how was the first step and how was to publish the files. And the two designers did a very great work in creating the documentation and specifying what is needed, the cost, and things like that. So this is one example. So it's not just 3D printing, it's not just electronics, it can be also just laser cuts, and it can be done for local production and can be done for having someone produce for you. And we think it's really important because in here you can really open the project and maybe you have another self-organized kindergarten and then provide and contribute to create